Sir Francis Drake, born around 1540 in Devonshire, England, a renowned seaman and privateer whose circumnavigation of the globe from 1577 to 1580 established him as a pivotal figure in English naval history. These daring exploits included the successful raid on the Spanish silver train at Nombre de Dios, significantly enriching England and disrupting the Spanish maritime supremacy. Knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1581 for his services, Drake's strategic skill was instrumental in the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Thus, his legacy as a master navigator and privateer endures to this day, symbolizing the rise of the British Maritime Empire and the fall of the Spanish dominance in the New World. Hello and welcome to the channel. Is it your first time here? If it is, hello, good to meet you. And if you are coming back, it's good to see you again. As always, if you'd like to support the channel, the best way to do that is by liking, subscribing, and leaving your comments down below. Those who want to go above and beyond may refer to the Patreon link in the description. Now, with that being said, let's all get nice and relaxed. Take a deep breath. We may begin our biography of Sir Francis Drake. Francis Drake was born at the rustic Crowndale farm near Tavistock in Devon. His exact date of birth remains unconfirmed, but it is around the aforementioned date. This birth year is deducted from various contemporary texts, one of which notes that Drake was 22 when he obtained the command of the Judith in 1566, which suggests that he was born around or before 1544 at the latest. But most people settle on the date of 1540. Now, 1549, that was a difficult year for the family. The Drakes were compelled to flee their home in Devon all the way to Kent, mainly due to the severe religious persecution that erupted during the Prayer Book Rebellion, a topic for another video. All you need to know is that it was something that you would definitely want to run away from if you were on the pointy end of it. Now, it was in Kent that Francis's father found a brand new calling, that being ministering to the sailors in the King's Navy. After being ordained as a deacon, he was appointed as the vicar of Upchurch on the Medway. This period marked a significant chapter in young Francis's life and set the stage for his future maritime adventures. Now, from an early age, Francis was immersed in the world of maritime adventure, beginning his seafaring career as an apprentice under the guidance of his relative, the sea captain William Hawkins of Plymouth. His talent and diligence were evident from the start, and by the age of 18 he had already advanced to the position of purser, as noted by English chronicler Edmund Howes. In the 1550s, Drake's father secured him a position with the master of a small bark, which was a vessel that was part of the bustling trade network between the Medway River and the Dutch coast. Here, Drake likely engaged in commerce, traversing the coasts of England, the Low Countries, and even as far as France. The ship's master was thoroughly impressed with Drake's conduct, and, having no suitable heirs of his own, bequeathed the bark to Drake upon his death Now that's lucky. Now, something a little bit less pleasant. When we look at the historical context of 1562, the West African slave trade was largely controlled by the Portuguese and the Spanish. Sir John Hawkins, seeing an opportunity, formulated a strategy to infiltrate and capitalize on this lucrative trade. Now, Drake, while not among the financiers of this venture, is believed to have served as a common seaman on Hawkins' initial slaving voyages, while anecdotal evidence suggests Drake's involvement in the first two voyages. Stronger evidence confirms his presence in the last two of the 4 slaving voyages conducted by Hawkins between 1562 and 1569. Hawkins' first venture in 1562 involved capturing Portuguese slave ships off the coast of Sierra Leone and selling the captured Africans in the Spanish Indies, yielding substantial profits. Encouraged by this success, Hawkins embarked on a second slave-trading voyage in 1564, this time with the explicit backing of the Queen, that being Queen Elizabeth II, of course, who lent him the ship Jesus of Lubeck. This time, Hawkins aggressively captured many inhabitants of an African town and sold them at Spanish ports in the Caribbean, again turning a significant profit for himself, the Queen, and their consortium of investors. Though not a member of the consortium, Drake, as part of the crew, would have received a share of the profits, albeit probably not much of a share. The Spanish and Portuguese were not pleased, of course, with the English foray into the slave trade, a market that they had considered their own. They didn't want anybody else muscling in on their business. Well, under diplomatic pressure to avoid conflict, Queen Elizabeth eventually prohibited Hawkins from undertaking a third expedition. But Hawkins was undeterred. He arranged for a voyage under the command of his relative, John Lovell, in 1566, and of course he wanted Drake to come with him. This venture did not meet with success, however, as over 90 of the enslaved Africans were released without payment. Drake's next notable adventure was in 1567, joining Hawkins on what would be their final joint voyage. The crew attempted to capture slaves around Cape Verde, but met with little success. They then allied with local kings in Sierra Leone, capturing several hundred prisoners, although the kings retained a larger share of the captives. This voyage faced numerous challenges, including storms, Spanish hostility, and of course a devastating hurricane that separated one ship from the rest of the fleet. The remaining ships, well, they were forced into the port of San Juan de Ulua, near Veracruz. Quite a lot of repairs needed to be done. Well, soon after they were attacked by the Spanish, under the newly appointed Viceroy of New Spain, Martin Enrique de Almanza, leading to the disastrous Battle of San Juan de Ulua. The English suffered a significant defeat, and they lost all but 2 of their ships. In the chaos, Drake, who was now captain of the Judith, made the difficult decision to flee, leaving Hawkins and the others behind. Hawkins, however, escaped on the Minion, returning to England with a mere 15 of his original crew, leaving hundreds of English sailors abandoned. Upon his return, Hawkins was a little bit upset. He accused Drake of desertion and the theft of treasure. Drake, of course, refuted these accusations, maintaining that he had distributed all profits fairly among the crew, and had believed Hawkins to be lost when he made the decision to retreat. Well, this contentious end in their voyage marked a turning point for Drake's career. From then on, he abandoned trading and slaving in favor of direct confrontations with Spanish holdings. This change in focus was partly fueled by the animosity towards the Spanish that Drake developed after the Battle of San Juan de Ulva and its aftermath. The 1567–69 voyage marked his final involvement in anything to do with the slave trade. Well over these last 4 voyages, approximately 1,200 Africans were enslaved, with estimates suggesting that up to 3 times as many may have perished. Well, in 1572, a little while later, Francis Drake embarked on his first significant independent venture, targeting the Isthmus of Panama, an area that the Spanish referred to as part of the Tierra Firme, and the English as the Spanish Main. This region was crucial, as it was where the immense wealth of Peruvian silver and gold was unloaded and transported overland to the Caribbean Sea. From there, Spanish galleons would ship it to Spain from the town of Nombre de Dios, departing Plymouth, on May 24, 1572, with 73 men aboard 2 small vessels, the Pasha and the Swan. Drake set his eyes to seize Nombre de Dios. Drake's initial assault on Nombre de Dios occurred in late July of 1572. He managed to capture the town, but was severely wounded by the arriving Spanish forces from Panama, who were understandably angry, forcing his retreat without securing the treasures stored in the royal treasury. Well, he decided not to attack Nombre de Dios again, but shifted his focus to simply raiding the Spanish galleons along the coast where he could find them. He also, along with the help of his allies, the Cimarrons, who were escaped African slaves, somewhat ironic, raided the mule trains carrying gold, silver, and goods from Panama City. Among these men was Diego, who later earned his freedom after many years serving under Drake. And here we find one of Drake's most notable exploits. During this period, it was the capture of the Spanish silver train at Nombre de Dios on April the 1st, 1573, which of course significantly enriched him and increased his fame. Near Cabo de Cativas, he encountered a French privateer, Guillaume le Testu, commanding the 80-ton warship called the Havre. The two joined forces, and Drake planned to intercept the mule train at Campos River, 2 leagues from Nombre de Dios. He instructed his captains to rendezvous at the Francisca River on April 3rd to extract them after the raid. The combined English and French forces, along with the Cimarron scouts, surprised the mule convoy, the following morning seized over 200,000 pesos worth of treasure. After attacking the train, Drake and his cohorts discovered that they had captured around 20 tons of silver and gold, a lot more than they thought was going to be there. So, they couldn't carry it all. It's a good problem to have. They buried much of this treasure, way too heavy to take back, and fled with a significant amount of more carryable gold. This incident may have inspired many later tales of pirates and buried treasure. Tragically, during the retreat, however, Letestu was captured and executed. The adventurers struggled to carry as much gold and silver as they could across approximately 18 miles of jungle-covered mountains to their raiding boat's location. Arriving at the coast, they found that the boats were missing, leaving them demoralized, exhausted, and stranded with the Spanish close behind. Drake, where are the boats?" Well, at this critical juncture, Drake took to inspiring his men. He then buried the treasure on the beach and got to work constructing a raft. With this, he and 4 other sailors sailed 12 miles in heavy swells to where they had left 2 other boats. Now, when Drake finally reached the boats, his crew, shocked by his disheveled appearance, feared the worst. Well, Drake, playing along with their fears before revealing a large amount of Spanish gold, and happily declaring, "Our voyage is made." By the second week of August 1573, Drake returned triumphantly to Plymouth. An exceptional moment during this expedition was on February the 11th, when Drake and his lieutenant, John Oxenham, became the first Englishmen to sight the Pacific Ocean. They climbed a high tree in Panama's central mountains, a feat first achieved by the Spaniard Vasco Núñez de Balboa in 1513. The Cimarrons had carved steps into the tree, leading to a platform where Drake, Oxenham, and the Cimarron leader Pedro viewed the vast ocean. They vowed that one day they would sail these waters, a promise Drake fulfilled during his later world circumnavigation. Upon his return, Drake was celebrated as a hero in England, and of course vilified as a pirate in Spain. Although the British government had signed a temporary truce with Spain's King Philip II, it could not officially recognize Drake's accomplishments. You know, politics. In 1575, Drake was involved in the Rathlin Island massacre in Ireland. Under the directives of Sir Henry Sidney and the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux, Sir John Norris and Drake laid siege to Rathlin Castle. Following its surrender, Norris's troops killed all 200 defenders and several hundred civilians, which of course included women and children of the clan MacDonald. Meanwhile, Drake's task was to prevent any reinforcements from reaching the island from the Gaelic Irish or Scots. This left Sorley Boy MacDonald, yes, his actual name, a leader of the Gaelic resistance against the English power, stranded on the mainland. The devastating attack led Essex to report to Queen Elizabeth's secretary that Sorley Boy was likely to have run mad for sorrow, having lost everything he ever valued in the assault. Yeah, feel a little bit sorry for him, don't you? Well, after the successful raid on the Panama Isthmus, Drake planned a significant expedition, which was later known as the famous voyage, targeting the Spanish territories along the Pacific coast of the Americas. This ambitious journey was backed by a consortium including influential figures such as Francis Walsingham, Robert Dudley, the first Earl of Leicester, John Hawkins, Christopher Hatton, and of course, Drake himself. The original idea, authored by Sir Richard Grenville, received a royal patent in 1574 for such an expedition. However, Queen Elizabeth rescinded this patent a year later upon learning of Grenville's aggressive intentions towards the Spanish. Despite this, in 1577, Elizabeth likely provided financial backing for Drake's voyage to South America, though she stopped short of giving him an official commission. Well, this voyage aimed to be the first circumnavigation in almost 6 decades, so you can see how it was more than a big deal. Once again, Diego, returning character, was part of Drake's crew. His bilingual abilities in Spanish and English making him an invaluable interpreter for encounters with Spanish or Portuguese speakers. Employed as Drake's servant, Diego was compensated like the other crew members. Setting out from Plymouth on November the 15th, 1577, Drake and his fleet faced immediate challenges from severe weather, forcing them to seek refuge in Falmouth, Cornwall. After repairs, they departed again on December the 13th, aboard the flagship Pelican, with 4 additional ships and 164 men. Drake soon expanded his fleet by capturing the Portuguese merchant ship Mary, originally Santa Maria, off the coast of Africa near the Cape Verde Islands, and he also took its experienced navigator Nuno da Silva captive. As they crossed the Atlantic, Drake's fleet dwindled. He had to scuttle the Christopher and the flyboat Swan due to the loss of men. The fleet made landfall eventually at the forbidding Puerto San Julian in present-day Argentina, a site where Ferdinand Magellan had executed mutineers half a century earlier. Drake's crew encountered the eerie sight of bleached skeletons on Spanish gibbets. Echoing Magellan, Drake held a trial and executed his own mutineer, Thomas Doherty. The ship Mary was found to be rotting and was stripped and abandoned. Choosing to overwinter in San Julian, Drake delayed his push through the Strait of Magellan. The execution of Thomas Doherty. Drake's journey was marred by internal strife, particularly with co-commander Thomas Doherty. On June 3, 1578, Doherty was accused by Drake of witchcraft, of all things, and faced charges of mutiny and treason in a ship trial. Drake, asserting he had a royal commission, which he didn't, it was never produced, denied Doherty a trial back in England. Key evidence against Doherty came from the ship's carpenter, Edward Bright, whose testimony was crucial. Well, after the trial, Bright was promoted to master of the ship Marigold, and Doherty having disclosed the voyage's purpose to Lord Burghley, a critic of provoking the Spanish, was found guilty. The night before his execution, Doherty and Drake shared communion and dined together, maintaining a show of camaraderie. Francis Fletcher, the ship's chaplain, described this last meal as both sharing cheerfully, as if some journey only had been in hand. On July the 2nd, 1578, Drake executed Doherty by cutting his head off, which usually does the trick. The voyage continued to face hardships, and by January 1580, Drake found himself stranded on a reef in the Celebes Sea. When Fletcher suggested that their misfortunes were divine retribution for Doherty's unjust death, Drake furiously chained him to a hatch cover and declared him excommunicated. Well after this execution of Thomas Doherty, Drake and his reduced fleet of 3 ships set sail for the Strait of Magellan at the southern tip of South America. By September 1578, Drake had navigated through the strait and had entered the Pacific Ocean. It was here that violent storms led to the loss of the Marigold, captained by John Thomas, and forced Elizabeth, under John Winter, to turn back to England. This left Drake with only his flagship, the Pelican. Upon reaching the Pacific, Drake renamed Pelican to Golden Hind to honor Sir Christopher Hatton, whose crest featured a golden hind. Drake's journey along the Chilean coast led him approximately 55 degrees south, as recorded in Richard Hakluyt's The Principal Navigations, Voyages and Discoveries of the English Nation. Here, he and his crew engaged in skirmishes with the indigenous peoples of southern Patagonia, marking the first European conflict with the native inhabitants of this region. During their time in the Straits, the crew learned that an infusion made from the bark of Drimys winteri was effective against scurvy, which led to the scientific naming of the plant. The more you know. Historian Matteo Martinic has noted that Drake's explorations were pivotal in identifying the southern extremity of the Americas and the adjacent oceanic regions. Initial reports of Drake's findings south of Tierra del Fuego emerged after the explorations of William Schouten and Jacob Lemaire in 1616. Raids on the Spanish-American west coast. Continuing north along the Pacific coast of South America in the Golden Hind, Drake attacked various Spanish ports and got busy with the plundering of various towns. He captured several Spanish ships, using their more accurate navigational charts, as the English hadn't quite caught up to them just yet. Near Mocha Island, which is now part of modern-day Chile, hostile Mapuche injured Drake and his servant Diego with arrows. Further north, in Valparaiso, also modern-day Chile, Drake seized a ship loaded with Chilean wine. Near Lima, in Peru, Drake captured a Spanish ship carrying 25,000 pesos of gold, equivalent to about 7 million pounds in today's currency. That's British pounds. He also learned of the Nuestra Senora de la Concepcion, sailing west towards Manila. He pursued and captured this treasure ship, later named Cacafuego, which was his most lucrative prize. Not just a ship, but a ship filled with treasure. Aboard the Cacafuego, Drake found 36 kilograms of gold, also a golden crucifix, jewels, 13 chests of silver reals, and 26,000 kilograms of silver. Of course, he was quite delighted with this fortune. Drake dined with the captured ship's officers and passengers, later releasing them with gifts and letters of safe conduct. He then continued his northern journey, raiding more Spanish settlements. His final significant stop was in Guatulco, where his crew looted from April 13th to the 16th. It was here that Drake began to be a little bit homesick and wanted to return to England. He had a few options. The options were to sail back along the Spanish-dominated coast, or to seek a northern passage through the rumored Strait of Anian. He ruled out the dangerous southern return, considering either continuing north to the Strait of Anian or just crossing the Pacific towards the East Indies. In May, Drake's ship bypassed the Baja California Peninsula, continuing north. This part of the journey was into largely uncharted territory, as the western coast of North America had only been partially explored by Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo in 1542 for Spain. Or to avoid further Spanish conflict, Drake sought a discreet location to prepare for the return journey. On June the 5th, 1579, Drake made a brief landfall at South Cove, Cape Arago, just south of Goose Bay in Oregon. Then he moved southward. By June 17th, he found a protected cove along the coast of what is now northern California. There, he claimed the land for Queen Elizabeth, naming it Nova Albion, or New Albion. To solidify this claim, he posted an engraved brass plate marking the sovereignty for Elizabeth and her successors. The crew set up a fort and worked for weeks to repair the Golden Hind, including careening the ship to clean and repair the hull. Drake had friendly interactions with the local coastal tribes, the Miwok, and he explored the region. Well, it couldn't all be a holiday. He left New Albion on July the 23rd, and the ship stopped at the Farallon Islands the very next day, where the crew hunted for provisions, mainly for food. Seals and sea lions were reportedly particularly tasty. Drake then set a course southwest to catch the trade winds across the Pacific. Months later, he reached the Moluccas, part of modern-day Indonesia. It is suggested that Drake actually careened his ship on the shores of Magdalena Bay in Lower California due to challenging winds and currents before sailing to the Moluccas and the Spice Islands. Well, either way, it was here that Diego succumbed to wounds that he had sustained earlier. Poor old Diego. Well, the Golden Hind was also nearly lost on a reef, but was saved after the crew waited for favorable tides and dumped some cargo to lighten the ship. Drake also befriended Sultan Babula of Ternate in the Moluccas. The crew became entangled in local conflicts with the Portuguese before making stops along the African coast, rounding the Cape of Good Hope and reaching Sierra Leone by July 22nd, 1580, on their journey back to England. This marked the final leg of Drake's epic circumnavigation, which had significantly disrupted Spanish dominance and expanded English maritime knowledge. You know, the first time's the worst time, right? On September 26, 1580, the Golden Hind sailed into Plymouth, marking the triumphant return of Francis Drake, and 59 of the crew members, the ones that remained. And don't forget about the rich cargo of captured Spanish treasures and spices, ready to spice up that famous English cuisine. The value of the Queen's share of this cargo exceeded the total income of the English crown for that entire year, so she was quite happy as well. Drake's achievement as the first Englishman to circumnavigate the earth was celebrated, his voyage being the second ever to return with at least one ship intact after Elcano's voyage in 1520. Thus, Queen Elizabeth took a keen interest in maintaining the secrecy of Drake's voyages, declaring all written accounts to be the, and I quote, Queen's secrets of the realm. Drake and his fellow participants were sworn to secrecy, and if they told anyone, the Queen would kill them. So that was a good motivation to not tell anybody, especially the Spanish. Yes, the Queen aimed to keep these details very hidden from the Spanish, their rival in global exploration and conquest. In a gesture of gratitude, and to commemorate the successful circumnavigation, Drake presented Queen Elizabeth with a jewel token. This piece, seized off the Pacific coast of Mexico, was crafted from enameled gold and featured an African diamond and a miniature ship with an ebony hull. In return, the Queen bestowed upon Drake what is known as the Drake Jewel, an ornate pendant encircled with diamonds, rubies, and pearls. Now this gift was extraordinary, especially for a commoner. Remember, he wasn't Sir Francis Drake yet, but he was certainly about to be. And Drake was depicted wearing this jewel in a 1591 portrait by Marcus Gerards. The pendant featured a portrait of Elizabeth by miniaturist Nicholas Hilliard on one side, and on the reverse a sardonyx cameo depicting double portrait busts, a regal woman and an African male. The Drake jewel remains a rare survivor among 16th century jewels, and is preserved at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Go and see it while you can. April the 4th, 1451, Queen Elizabeth bestowed a knighthood on Francis Drake aboard the Golden Hind docked in Deptford. Interestingly, the knighthood was actually performed by the French diplomat Monsieur de Marchemont, who was the negotiating party for Elizabeth to marry Francis, the Duke of Anjou, the brother of the King of France. Involving the French diplomat was a bit of a strategic move by Elizabeth, as it subtly garnered French political support for Drake's actions. During the Victorian era, nationalist sentiment reshaped this story, promoting the idea that Elizabeth herself had knighted Drake. But that is just not the case. Following his knighthood, Drake adopted the coat of arms of the ancient Devon family of Drake of Ash, claiming a distant kinship. This claim led to a legal dispute over the right to use these arms, prompting Queen Elizabeth to award Drake his very own coat of arms. His heraldic achievement is inscribed with the motto Sic Parvis Magna, which means great achievements from small beginnings. I might write that and put it on the wall. The coat of arms features a hand emerging from the clouds, labeled Auxilio Divino, signifying by divine aid. This symbolized the belief that Drake's successors were supported by divine providence, a common view in an era that saw national destiny and divine will as closely intertwined. In 1585, as tensions between England and Spain escalated, the signing of the Treaty of Nonsuch precipitated an open conflict. Queen Elizabeth, through her principal secretary, Francis Walsingham, tasked Sir Francis Drake, and yes, it's Sir now after his knighthood, with leading a preemptive strike against the Spanish colonies. Thus Drake set sail from Plymouth in September of the same year, commanding an impressive fleet of 21 ships and about 1,800 soldiers under the leadership of Christopher Carleill. The expedition's first target was Vigo in Spain, where Drake held the town for 2 weeks to ransom supplies. He then moved to plunder Santiago in the Cape Verde Islands. The fleet crossed the Atlantic, where Drake sacked the port of Santo Domingo and captured the city of Cartagena de Indias in present-day Colombia. Notably, while in Cartagena, Drake released about 100 enslaved Turks, which of course made the Turks very happy. On June the 6th, 1586, during the voyage's return leg, he attacked the wooden fort at San Agustin in Spanish Florida, burning the entire town to the ground. After these successful raids, Drake proceeded to Sir Walter Raleigh's Roanoke settlement, where he replenished supplies and took all of the original colonists back to England before the arrival of Sir Richard Grenville with additional supplies and settlers. Drake finally returned to England on July 22nd of 1586, entering Portsmouth to a hero's welcome, naturally. While the aggressive nature of Drake's actions and those of other English and Dutch privateers certainly was not received well by the Spanish, thus Philip II of Spain prompted an invasion of England. Plans had to be made. Drake accepted a new commission on March the 15th, 1587, with multiple objectives, including disrupting Spanish supply lines to Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, and attacking the Spanish Armada if it had set sail. Arriving at Cadiz on April 19th, Drake found the harbor filled with ships preparing for the Armada. Launching a daring attack, Drake inflicted heavy damage, claiming to have sunk 39 ships, though Spanish reports admittedly only to 24 losses. Well, who do you believe? Either way, this assault, known as the singeing of the king's beard, delayed the Spanish invasion for over a year. Drake continued his disruptions along the Iberian coast, capturing significant quantities of supplies and making a total profit of around £140,000 for England, with 18,000 of that going to Drake himself. when the Spanish Armada set sail for England in the May of 1588, the English fleet, led by Lord Howard of Effingham, with Drake as vice admiral aboard the Revenge, met the Spanish off the Cornwall coast on July the 29th. Drake famously captured the disabled Nuestra Señora de Rosario, including its significant monetary cargo, which was intended for the Armada. As the Armada attempted to regroup near Calais, Drake and the other English commanders launched fire ships against the Spanish fleet, which of course forced them into the open sea. The decisive battle occurred off Gravelands, where Drake, Frobisher, and Hawkins inflicted significant damage on the Spanish fleet, leading to the loss of 5 ships. Drake, in a letter to Admiral Henry Seymour, dated the 31st of July 1588, noted the fierce engagement, expressing that the Spanish seemed determined to fight to the death and would not give up without a significant beatdown. Somewhat paraphrased, of course. While the damaged Armada, unable to return via the English Channel, was forced to sail around the British Isles, encountering devastating storms off the Irish coast. The fleet returned to Spain, with a grand loss of 63 ships. One of the most enduring anecdotes about Drake is his legendary composure during the imminent Spanish invasion. It is said that upon being warned of the approaching Spanish fleet while playing bowls in Plymouth Hoe, Drake remarked that there was plenty of time to finish the game and still defeat the Spaniards. This story, though lacking contemporary eyewitness accounts and first recorded 37 years later, reflects that mythos of Drake's calm demeanor in the face of danger, possibly influenced by the adverse winds that delayed the English fleet's launch as the Armada approached. In 1589, following the defeat of the Spanish Armada, England mounted its own offensive against Spain. Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norris were tasked with 3 main objectives. Firstly, to destroy the Spanish Atlantic Fleet, which was under repair in northern Spain. Second, to land at Lisbon in Portugal, incite a revolt against King Philip II and also Philip I of Portugal, and support the installation of the pretender Dom Antonio, Prior of Crato, to the Portuguese throne. And thirdly, to attempt the capture of the Azores, to establish a permanent English base there. Thus the campaign began with an attempt to engage the Spanish fleet in the port of A Coruña. Drake and Norris managed to destroy several ships, but faced strong resistance, and were ultimately repelled. This setback delayed their plans by 2 weeks, forcing them to abandon the pursuit of the remaining Spanish ships and proceed directly to Lisbon. Norris led his troops on a challenging march along the rocky Portuguese coast to Lisbon, while Drake, with the fleet, sailed around the peninsula. By the time Norris's troops reached Lisbon, they were exhausted, not only from the journey itself, but by plague and all sorts of other illnesses. Norris relied on Dom Antonio to rally local support, demanding provisions and reinforcements, or else threatening to retreat. And contrary to their agreed strategy, Drake anchored his fleet at the mouth of the Tagus River, avoiding the risk of sailing past Lisbon's well-defended approaches to deliver the needed artillery and heavy ordnance. The anticipated local uprising in support of Dom Antonio, however, did not materialize, and the land campaign ultimately faltered. Norris, his army, and Antonio re-embarked, attempting instead to intercept the Spanish treasure fleet. However, it was thwarted by bad weather, compelling them to simply sail back to England, where the weather is always good and sunny. On their return, Drake sought to salvage some measures of success from the campaign. He made a brief stop in the Galician Rias, where he pillaged the defenseless town of Vigo for 2 days, burning it to the ground. However, this raid proved costly, as Drake lost hundreds more men to combat and sickness, with around 200 being wounded. Not bad for a defenseless town. While the strengthening local defenses and arriving Portuguese militias forced Drake's fleet to retreat once more. During their return through the Bay of Biscay, 2 of the English vessels were captured by a squadron of Zabras led by Captain Diego de Aramburu. The failed expedition was disastrous, to say the least, with estimated losses ranging from 8 to 20,000 English soldiers and sailors. Well, upon his return to England, Drake faced scrutiny over his conduct during the expedition. The Privy Council charged him with various failings and mishandling of his command, although he was never publicly admonished for these charges. The episode led to a significant decline in his favor at court. It was not until 1595, 6 years later, that Drake was given command of another naval expedition. These series of events marked a downturn in a previously illustrious career. It's a harsh reality of the Elizabethan era. You can win 100 battles, but as soon as you lose one, all of a sudden, nobody wants you. Poor Drake. Well, Drake's final expeditions and battles went thusly. His attempts to conquer the port of La Palmas ended in failure, and his fortunes did not improve as he continued his campaign. His efforts to capture San Juan de Puerto Rico also met with defeat in the Battle of San Juan. During this engagement, the Spanish defenses proved all too much for him. Gunners from El Morro Castle managed to fire a cannonball directly through Drake's storeroom on the expedition's flagship. Remarkably, Drake survived this direct hit, but the incident underscored the intense resistance he faced. With his second in command, Thomas Baskerville, Drake captured and burned Nombre de Dios. They then attempted an ambitious overland crossing of the isthmus to attack Panama City. However, the Spanish were very well prepared, having barricaded the road, and the English forces were unable to break through these defenses. Suffering heavy casualties, Drake and Baskerville were forced to abandon their attempt to take the city. Well, a few weeks after the failed attack on Panama, on January 28, 1596, Drake succumbed to dysentery while anchored off the coast of Portobello, where some Spanish treasure ships had sought refuge. This disease, of course, was very common and deadly among sailors during this period, so it wasn't anything surprising, and no one expected foul play. At the time of his death, Drake was 56 years old. Not old, but certainly not young for the time. Well, in a poignant final request, Drake asked you to be subscribed to ASMR Historian. No, I'm just kidding. He asked to be dressed in his full armor before he died, a most dignifying end. He was then buried at sea in a lead-lined coffin near Portobello. His burial place is believed to be near the wrecks of two British ships, the Elizabeth and the Delight, which were earlier scuttled in Portobello Bay. Following his death, the English fleet, demoralized and defeated, shrugged their shoulders and simply returned home. Now, this exact location of his final resting place is still a bit of a mystery, and it's a subject of ongoing interest. Efforts by marine archaeologists, researchers, and various treasure hunters to locate his sealed coffin continue to this day. Divers have explored the seabed around Portobello Bay, hoping to uncover the site where one of the most famous English seafarers was laid to rest. It's still out there somewhere. Perhaps even by the time you're watching this video, we will have discovered it. Who knows? But as of this time in 2024, we have not. Well, his death certainly marked the end of an era, a life characterized by bold ventures and the substantial impact he had on naval warfare and exploration. Definitely up there with others like, let's say, Horatio Nelson and Ferdinand Magellan. Certainly up there, for sure. Well, I'd like to thank you for listening this far. Aren't you good? I'm sure you've learned quite a lot, at least I hope so, as that was the entire point of the video. I'd like to thank my top-tier Patreon subscribers. That's Stark Factory, JC, and Jeffrey. 3 Chads, for sure. And I will see you back here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Love you all, good night, and good luck, friend.